Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to welcome all the Front Porch Society members for joining us here today, and thank you, for your consistent giving to the University of Dayton. And no matter what area you give to, I know many of you are Flyer fans, but give to all areas of the university. And so we're grateful for your support, especially during this time. I will eventually turn it over to Coach Grant and to Coach Green for some remarks, and then we'll take some questions. But before we do that, I will just try to provide a little bit of a brief update and overview of what's going on in athletics, both from a basketball perspective and from just an all sports perspective. So I think first and foremost, our university is about education, and that's what we're about. And so our student athletes, first and foremost, wear the hat of student. And so the university will start to begin phasing in-person instruction on Saturday, which will include some of our athletes. And they will begin moving in each day over a period of 16 days, of which our athletes will be included. Our men's and women's basketball teams are here on campus, and they've been here for a couple weeks. Also, I think many of you seen previously released, the Atlantic 10 has postponed fall sports. They do have a modest, what they call a look-in window in mid-September to be able to go back to the and look at the medical data and look at the status of the virus in order to, give us an opportunity to see if the medical conditions have changed. To be honest with you, I think it's a very low likelihood, and for all purposes, I believe we will not be playing fall sports, on our campus this fall. Football is governed by the Pioneer Football League, and I think there'll be some decisions with that here in the next few days. But I think it'll be a challenging environment to play football as well. From a national standpoint, there's obviously a lot going on with start dates, NCAA tournament. What will a season look like? When will it start? What type of fans can you have? What's the fan capacity? This morning, we released a survey to our fans, just trying to get some input. If there are restrictions on attendance at the UD Arena, how would we go about executing and implementing that, and what that would look like from a practical standpoint. We're out ahead of it early. We've got a lot of time to do that, but we just want to start having dialogue with you and our other fans in order to see if we can find the best feasible path in order to manage any attendance restrictions that we have. There's also been, a lot of talk of the proverbial bubbles and how we're able to keep our student athletes safe, and then will that lead to schedule changes and stuff like that? And at this point, it's just too early for us to know exactly how that will all play out in terms of, our schedule right now is we're planning on moving forward with it as is. But as we all know, during this pandemic, things can change, and they can change rapidly. So we also announced today that we will be switching our tickets to mobile ticketing to be able to adapt and just change game updates and send them to your phone. So just to kind of wrap up my intro, our university students are starting to come back. That includes our student athletes. Our basketball teams have been back here for a couple of weeks, and they've been engaged in workouts, and then we're trying to prepare ourselves for all eventualities that will come our way during the basketball season in terms of our schedule, in terms of our ability to in what capacity we can have fans in the arena. So now we will jump into the conversation with Coach Grant and with Coach Green. Coach, a question for you. What do you think other teams, our offensive efficiency and how we did so well offensively this past year, when another team is scouting us, what kind of system do they think they refer to us as in terms of running from a basketball standpoint? Whether, some people know they call Bo Ryan's offense a swing offense, or they call some people get out and run. What do you think our offense is kind of classified? If you had to put it in a category, how would people describe it?
That's a great question. I think for us, it would probably be 4 round 1, ball screen continuity is terms I hear a lot. High-low, a high-low game involved in that ball screen continuity action is probably the way I hear, just from other people talking when they ask me questions about, what we do. Those probably are the most common common terms, 4-around-1, ball screen continuity, and high-low action.
Coach Green, if you just I know you like to score in less than 7 seconds in the women's side. Maybe just same question for you. How do you think other teams in the Atlantic 10 or non-conference classify when they're scouting us or competing against us? I think you got to unmute yourself there, Coach. That's all right.
You would think I would know that from how many of these Zooms, but it happens every time. So, I would say the number one thing, especially in conference, that people try to take away from us is our tempo and how fast we play. So you'll see a lot of people not even really crashing the offensive boards against us. They're just getting back to they're going to play the numbers, and they don't want us to score. And what we like to say in our Phoenix transition, score in 6 seconds or less. So I think that would be the number one thing, especially conference teams over the years have really tried to take away in terms of our offense.
You know, it's interesting if you watch our women play, when the other team shoots the ball, all 5 players sprint back on defense, and sometimes they don't even try to rebound. Their whole entire team gets back on defense because that's how fast Coach Green's trying to get down on the other end to score. So a lot of questions coming in, just generally speaking about recruiting. So obviously, and they're taking a number of different formats, but you know, they know that the recruiting has been over Zoom. You know, there's no campus visit. There's an NCAA dead period that's at least through the rest of the month of August, which means no recruiting on campus or off campus. Coach Grant, just start with you. You know, how do you go through the process of your evaluation process when you're normally in the summer laying eyes on the players, kind of get a see for their court demeanor? Is that some homework that was done before the pandemic that you can rely on, or video, or just how do you and the staff kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I think a combination of all those things. I think obviously the more prepared that your staff has been in terms of doing some early work from the previous summer or the previous season in terms of this next class, the 21 class, the better off you would have been. And fortunately for us, our guys were able to get out and see some really good guys and put our eyes on some people. But you rely on that. You rely on the relationships that you've developed with high school and AAU coaches from across the country in terms of their opinions about certain guys. And then you also rely on being able to get game film from either high school seasons or, you know, in some cases, some states have actually opened up and are actually playing AAU events. So there's live streams, there's recorded games that you can kind of get access to. And so it's you know, it's a new normal, but it's a new normal for everybody across the country in terms of being able to build those relationships over the phone and through these Zoom meetings where you kind of, you know, build those relationships with families and recruits and coaches and whatnot, and try to put yourself in a position where you know, you're in position to continue to move the program forward. And I think for a lot of these young people, it's a difficult time for them, probably more than anything else, because if you look at when the pandemic hit and when everything got shut down, a lot of them didn't get a chance to finish their season. You're talking about unsigned seniors, junior college players, and then the whole transfer market where guys would typically be able to get a field either by coming on campus or by maybe playing in the spring and getting some more exposure. That was taken away from them. And the same thing for this 21 class. So you see a sense of urgency with kids and their families to want to build those relationships and want to have access to what's coming next for them. Hopefully, once the pandemic is away from us.
Coach Green, maybe just same question for you. Just other than having to move on Zoom, how do you evaluate these players and get a feel for them?
Yeah, I think that's been the toughest thing. You know, we rely so much, I know, on July, and especially seeing young kids. And for me to see, usually I'm seeing all the 21s and trying to, you know, solidify some of those and finish those up. So I think that there was more urgency, like Coach said, with some of these 21s, because they knew once the July was canceled, they knew they weren't going to probably class. some see either way. I think some programs are really going to benefit from some of these guys, and because I think you can get a steal. I think the two of our commitments, I think they would have blown up a little bit more in July. So it probably helped us them not having a July where, you know, and some of these I think some kids may have been over recruited, and they may go to a place and end up in not working out. But you know, we got 221 commitments in quarantine, so. I was really happy with that, but it goes back to what Coach Grant said. We did our work early, and so we were in a really good position with those guys. And then once they knew they weren't going to be able to go out and play in front of college coaches, they went ahead and made those decisions. And then we also got our French kid for this class committed during the quarantine too, and early in it. So far we're done with our 21 class now, so we're just getting into our 22s, and fortunately we've done a lot of work on them last summer and throughout, so we're in a really good position with our 22s. So now it's really just all Zooms and getting ahead with that.
So interesting note just for the people joining us on the call. In almost all sports, women's recruiting is typically 18 to 22 months, if not more, ahead of equivalent on men's recruiting. So whether that's men's and women's soccer, that's men's and women's basketball, volleyball, it's not uncommon for young women to commit as juniors in high school or younger. I've met with recruits in those sports. They don't have the driver's license yet. The men's side, it tends to trend a little bit later for a number of different reasons, but just an interesting fact. So, you know, we're really careful at UD not to put expectations on young people too early before they're appropriate. I think we were successful doing that with Obi, a couple other players that, you know, we certainly don't want to put more pressure on them than they feel. But just in your first couple practices and first couple weeks on campus, could Coach Grant and then Coach Green, could you just touch a little bit on the freshmen and how you see, you know, just what you see, what do you think they bring to the table? Obviously no details, and it's too early to say, but just your general reaction to the new guys.
Shauna, I'll let you start.
Thanks.
New players, Coach.
Yeah, we have a huge class. So this is, I mean, we have 4 here, and then with Tenon, our French kid, that's going to be 5. So we went from extremely old last year where literally I think almost all of our team but our freshmen, but 5 people were over 21. Now we have 3 people that are 21 and everyone's really young. So we kind of flipped it. So our freshmen, they're very highly recruited and highly touted, you know, as high school players. So they have a ton of ability, and now it's just about getting the feel for college basketball and for about how we want to play and our philosophies and all the little details. So that's really what we're honing in on right now with them. I'm really happy with how they're catching on to stuff. I mean, they're very coachable. They're working, they're listening, and then they're adapting really quickly, and they're catching on, which is always a good sign for us as coaches. So we need them to be able to play. We need them to contribute. It's not one of those years where we're like, you know what, we're okay. You can take a year. We're going to need some of those guys to really be ready to go and contribute for us. We have good returners, a good set of, you know, people that got a ton of minutes. But this was one of our, you know, highest ranked classes ever in terms of recruiting and where they were ranked, which rankings are rankings. We, you know, they are what they are, but they have the ability. So I'm super excited about them. And they all really, really want to be elite and elite players, and they're working right now that way.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll say with our group, you know, we'll have 3 true freshmen and then 2 redshirt freshmen. So Mulai Susoko and Zemi Wokeji were actually on campus this past year. Mulai for the entire year, and then Zemi for the second semester. So, you know, we feel like when those guys have an opportunity to learn a system and to get that experience, to learn their teammates, to get familiar with our culture and our style of play, that's been really helpful. I think you can look back, you know, over the last probably decade or so at Dayton, where guys have had a chance to do that, where they've come in and redshirt, and it's been really beneficial to them in our program. So we feel like those 2 guys, having had an opportunity to do that for at least 6 months, we hope to see some benefit from that. And then our three true freshmen, with R.J. Blakeney and Luke Frazier and Kobe Brea, those three guys have done a really, really good job. I've been really impressed with their maturity. Okay, you think about, this is a brand new experience for them, being first-time college students, and they really first got introduced to their teammates through Zoom, in terms of actually, having conversations and being thrown into the middle of some conversations, whether it be stuff with our team or dealing with maybe some of the social issues that our country and our community has gone through and will continue to hopefully experience as we move forward. I've been really impressed with their maturity since they've been on campus, their ability to acclimate to college life, being away from home, acclimating with their new teammates, getting familiar with the expectations of our coaches and whatnot. So I'm really excited about them. As Neil mentioned, it's really too early to try to put any expectations on those guys in terms of how prepared they will be to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be in front of them as we move forward. But I've been really, really impressed so far with just who they are as people and the way they've acclimated to our culture and to our team.
So a couple other kind of pandemic related questions about the season. I guess some of these are kind of directed toward me. I'll try to just touch on a couple of these, and there's a few of them coming in. So maybe I'll just be big picture for a second. Whether that's talk about how the Atlantic 10 is planning to manage basketball games during the pandemic. I think we've seen Major League Soccer and the NBA be pretty successful with the bubble concept. As I mentioned earlier, it's not reasonable for us to completely isolate our student athletes from their families and from their schoolwork and from their classes and things like that. However, whether that's Atlantic 10 athletic directors or our relationship with the NCAA, having hosted the first four here since its inception, I've been quite aggressive with encouraging some outside the box thinking and trying to find ways that maybe, whether it's quasi bubbles or quasi strategies that would allow us to have the best opportunity to get as many games in during certain times as we can. So, for example, most schools across the country are ending in November, at least the in-person instruction, and then not beginning again until January. There's 30 to 45 days of a time where students are not on campus, and there may be opportunities to have certain competitions during that time. There's a lot of talk, and it's just talk. There's been no substantial discussion. But would the season kind of have a delayed start or a staggered start? Depending upon what the research and the likelihood of vaccines and those types of things are. I'm not confident in a whole lot during the pandemic, but the one thing I feel pretty confident in is that some semblance of the March Madness as we know it, at least in terms of that tournament occurring, there's a high degree of confidence that will take place in some form or fashion. And then the question is just, what does that look like? Would that ever look like May Madness instead of March Madness? Would it ever look like an expanded tournament to make up for the fact that maybe the non-conference is, could maybe be chopped up a little bit, and then you only have conference games to go on? So a lot of questions coming through in that regard. And at the end of the day, rather than me act like I know, I frankly just don't have those answers right now. I think that what I have been trying to do, representing Dayton basketball, which we think is nationally relevant, and then also representing a key partner with the NCAA and hosting the first four, is to say, let's take this time. And a lot of people are focused on college football and the fall sports, which are very important. But this is the most important thing we do here, other than education, is our men's and women's basketball programs. And so every day there's phone calls and conversations about what ifs and scenario planning. And I'm hopeful that there's enough scenarios as this plays out that some of them will pan out to be successful. Not necessarily basketball related, but a couple more questions surrounding the fall sports. I think you've seen that it's speaking candidly, it hasn't been a great process, I think, for the NCAA right now. There's been not as much unity as you would hope in the fall in terms of each individual conference making its own decision. Very few people wanting to be first. Who's going to pull the plug on a season, and how does that impact your student athletes and recruiting and your fan base? And so it's kind of been a very federated approach. We're really hopeful, and I know President Spina, who is on the NCAA Presidential Advisory Group, is advocating very strongly that there has to be a much more unified approach to college basketball. Right now, a sitting athletic director could not tell you what fall NCAA championships will look like, if they look like it at all. What is the format? What are the brackets? How does all that work? And in my opinion, we just cannot have that level of uncertainty around the men's and women's basketball tournaments, which are so critical. So I think there's a lot up in the air around fall sports. I think, as I mentioned, the Atlantic 10 does have this look-in window that I think would take a medical miracle for it to be successful. And so, in a selfish way, I'm never about eliminating opportunities for young people, but I would hope that Dayton and the Atlantic 10 and the fall sports could be aligned with the NCAA and all the nationally relevant conferences, versus have there be a lot of separation. That doesn't mean I wish that the Big Ten season doesn't occur or anything like that. I want all young people to get an opportunity, but I'm hopeful and continue to pursue unity in that we're all in Division I together, and how can we make this happen in one large group, rather than 32 individual conferences making 32 separate decisions, which is kind of where we're at right now, and it's not been a very great process. The second question would just be, again, I think I referenced this at the beginning, just we do not know what basketball capacity will look like at the arena. Quite a few questions come through on that. We'll just take that as it comes. That's part of the fan survey that went out to try to get an idea of where our fans' mindsets are, and then how that would impact from there. My commitment to all of you and to each other is that we're going to just do everything as in the safest possible way that we can, whether that's for our players and whether that is for our fans. And we want all you and your families to be healthy, so we'll follow all the public health guidance. And I think the second thing that's really important to understand is we did ask people to stick with us through the seeding program. At their gift, that was really about making sure that our program can, frankly, make it through this time. Without the seeding program, we simply would not be able to function as an athletic department at the level we both mutually expect. And so those are gifts to the university that we count on. Just to maintain basic operations. As for the tickets, we certainly plan on refunding, crediting, prorating anything with tickets or games that are interrupted, in order to do that. But my commitment to all of you is, if families and people are in a situation where health or otherwise that they frankly just shouldn't come to a game, we're going to give you the opportunity to renew those seats the following year. You're not going to be pushed out and have no chance to do that, provided you're in on the seating program. But for the tickets and parking and things like that, we plan to work with all our season ticket holders to make their best decision they can make for their family, and also the best decision we can make for the university. Coach Grant, I've had a couple questions. Could you just talk, how do you end up with getting a recruit from France during a pandemic? How does that work?
Coach Green.
Pull that off.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Coach Green.
That's okay. Grant Green, same thing.
Yeah.
No, we had been recruiting her, and actually I got to give credit to some of the men's staff, because Ricardo is the one that kind of put us in contact with her and her coach. So and we started recruiting her. We were watching her, and kind of it came the very end of it, and she couldn't come over, obviously, because of COVID. She was going to take a couple of visits, and I think the relationship we all had with her, and I think her coach felt comfortable with what Ricardo was saying as well. So we ended up getting her, and she's a really good player, and I'm super excited to get her here. Like I said, a lot of people didn't recruit her because they thought she was going to stay overseas and play professionally. But she had a knee injury about a year ago, and I think that's when she decided to come over to the States and play. So, like I said, I got to give some credit to our counterpart down the hallway. They helped us. So.
I will say, just to touch on that, how blessed and fortunate we are to have, two coaches, and not only the coaches, but their staff and their players that root for each other, that cheer for each other, that serve as sounding boards for each other. I hear stories across the country when you have to get into shared gym time and all those types of stuff. And, we're just really fortunate that, the two coaches you're looking at, they're a powerful duo together. They have a lot of mutual respect for each other. You'll see them at each other's games. You'll see them talk offline, and their teams have actually combined, during a time of social challenges and race and some of the more difficult topics that we have. These two coaches have led their teams together on joint Zoom meetings. Everything from having guest speakers. They've met with President Spina and myself, really about education, about encouraging them and just listening. We have a high population of Black and African American students in both sports, and they've actually done that together. Their teams have been together on that. I don't know, coaches, maybe a Zoom a week on average, or somewhere in that range, where the teams have joined together. And I think that's really, really powerful and really representative of what the University of Dayton is all about. So just as she said, she got an assist with recruiting from Coach Grant and Ricardo. I know that as soon as it could happen, vice versa, Shauna would do the same thing, and their staffs are really together. So I think that's that you should, all of you on the Zoom should be proud of the coaches that represent you that way. Coach Grant, could you just talk a little bit about, there's a lot to unpack here, maybe just generally speaking, whether it's the changes of transfers, name, image, likeness, do you see that, the ability to, it seems like endorsements and things like that are coming, to the basketball world, whether that's through state regulation, NCAA changes, lawsuits. How do you see Dayton's position in that, and how you think we have to, what we'd have to talk about in recruiting in that regard? Maybe I'll just lead into that to say, and I've said this publicly, obviously all within the rules and all with what's appropriate. I do think our town in Dayton, and being the show in town, does allow our athletes to develop their brand and do it in a really strong, meaningful way. But do you hear much of that in recruiting, and hear kids talk about name, image, likeness, and transfers without sitting out, and just a lot of instability in that area?
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think, a part of what you heard really when we first went into, the stay-at-home situation and doing recruiting virtually, there was a lot of talk about the transfers potentially having immediate eligibility, because I think that was the issue that was in front of a lot of people. And Neil and I, you and I spoke a lot about it in terms of, how to best get those transfers to understand what was coming. So, I think that certainly will be something that'll be on the forefront as we move forward. I think there's a strong push, probably as early as this upcoming year, for that to be a part of recruiting in terms of transfers having immediate eligibility. So we did face some situations with this class, the 2020 class, where some transfers were very, very interested in the possibility of moving and becoming immediately eligible. But obviously the NCAA came down with a decision that postponed it for a year. I think this upcoming year, it could be a lot different world for us in terms of what that looks like. And I think historically, Dayton's had a lot of success with being able to benefit from transfers coming in. And, that's something I think has been something that myself and our staff are really trying to make an option for us consistently, and we've had pretty good success so far with that being an option. So we'll see how it plays out. In regards to the name, image, and likeness, it's mixed in terms of talking to recruits and their families. Some of them are familiar with the conversation, some of them less so, but that's something that I think again will be something that will be in play for the upcoming year for the 2021 class. So I think the things that Neil and his staff and University of Dayton have put in place in terms of education about it, in terms of taking advantage of what the NCAA is looking at in terms of protocols for name, image, and likeness. I think we're on front of it in terms of making sure that we can put our athletes in position to benefit from some of the things that could potentially be coming down the road. It's really too early to know in terms of what it'll look like, at least as far as what I know. Neil, maybe you can speak a little bit more on it, but I think it's too early to tell what the NCAA will decide they're going to allow and what that'll look like. But I think we'll certainly be prepared for it.
And just for people on the Zoom that may not know all the details, essentially the NCAA has proposed and the Board of Governors has proposed that essentially student athletes would not be employees of the university, but they would be free to seek out their own endorsements, run their own camps, do their own commercials, endorse products on social media. If you think back to the Olympics, if you will, some people refer to it as the Olympic model, where the U.S. Olympic Committee didn't actually pay the athletes at the time, but allowed them to, be on the, do some advertising for Coca-Cola or whatever that would be. So that's kind of where things are headed. There's about 15 or so states that have laws that have essentially said that the NCAA has to do that in their state. And then the question is, how can the NCAA figure out how to do this with 500,000 college athletes in all divisions and across the country with different states, different labor laws, from California to Florida, and how that all could work. Coach Green, I'll go first with this, and I know Coach, I've been around coaches long enough that every game's the most important game on your schedule, and the next opponent's the toughest. I understand all that. So with that qualifier, just how do you view the A-10 in terms of teams that you think this year, knowing that all teams are going to be tough, but I'll ask each of you just kind of in the league, who's got a lot returning, who's got a lot coming back, and not necessarily a ranking, but just, all teams are formidable foes, but in a particular year, what do you see the Atlantic 10 shaping up on the women's side in terms of, a lot of talent back?
Yeah, there's a few teams that return, pretty much everyone. So VCU is going to be, I think, the team that everyone's going to pick to win because they return. They only lost one player. So I think that they'll be really good again. And then I also think St. Louis lost only one player as well. So they got a lot of good young kids. I think they'll be really tough. And then Fordham's just always tough. Fordham doesn't lose a player, and just their system of how they defend and they want to play really, really slow. So it's always going to be a grind. It's always going to be a tough game. So I think those are the three top teams that people will look at. And we, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, which I fought for in our league meetings, is I wanted to play them twice. So we get to play all three of those teams 2 times, which is good because we want to play the best and we want to have that hopefully help our RPI. So we'll be playing all those guys home and away, and I think they'll be the top 3 teams, or 3 of the top teams that'll be in the league this year.
Yeah, Coach, could you just touch a little bit on the men's side as well?
Yeah, I think on the men's side, you look at similar to what Shauna talked about, the quality of guys returning to the league. I think we had several players in our league from different teams that put their name in the draft, similar to what Obi and Jalen and Ibby did to test the waters. And I think Obi is the only underclassman in the league that kept his name in. So the league will have a lot of experience coming back. I think you look at Richmond and what they bring back. I think they bring back their entire starting 5 off a team that, in my opinion, was an NCAA caliber team this past year. So I would say there'll be a lot of expectations in terms of what they'll be capable of doing. I think St. Louis is another team you look at, and they bring back 2 guys that I think finished the year averaging a double-double for them, maybe in conference player on the season, and a lot of really good pieces around them. I think their whole starting 5 comes back, and they also add some pieces that will be, make them a formidable opponent as they were this past year. I think when I look across the league, Duquesne is another team that stands out to me because they had a lot of young guys for the last couple of years, and now they've got a veteran team coming back. So I think it'll make for a really exciting conference season as we move forward, and then you still are dealing with several teams, St. Bonaventure or Davidson or VCU traditionally that have been really good, and some other teams across the league that were young that there's no substitute for experience. So as teams get older, I like the group that we have, so I think it could be another banner year for the A-10 on the men's side.
Yeah, so you both alluded to the teams we played twice. So there's a couple questions on how that gets determined. The A-10 home and home matchups where you play 5 teams twice. The women one less than that, but really it's a little bit of the commissioner makes the decision. I certainly am not bashful about encouraging Dayton to be paired with top tier schools, home and homes with VCU, St. Louis, Rhode Island, et cetera, that we really feel it's important for us to be able to absolutely have the opportunity to play the best in our league, because those games are really hard to get outside your league. So if you have a chance to get them in your league, we got to get them, we got to play them. That can lead to some other challenges. Maybe you play the toughest teams and you finish third instead of first. But our goal is clearly championships and then NCAA at-large bids. And the only way you can do that is by demonstrating you are a nationally successful program, and you got to do that by beating other NCAA tournament teams. And so when we have them in our league, Dayton really encourages and pushes forward to be able to have our teams compete against those within our league. And frankly, I think it's good for the health of the league. TV typically likes those games. They're electric atmospheres. We seem to get everyone's best shot everywhere we go, where everyone else is white out, black out, whatever theme they have. And I think, as tough as that can be, that's what's good. That's what's good for college basketball. So, I think we're at our 5 minutes here. There's a lot of questions I wasn't able to get to. So hopefully, everyone, understands that. And then also know that just for all of you, obviously, thank you for supporting the university, supporting the Flyers. But my staff, obviously Coach Green and Coach Grant, they got a lot going on, but my staff, for those of you that know us, if we weren't able to get to some of your questions today, we're a pretty transparent group. I'm pretty easy to reach. Our staff is easy to reach. And so if there's, anything specific that you'd like to reach out to me or my staff on, please do that. And we'll make sure that we have a timely response to you. I'd like to thank the coaches for joining us. And, every time I have the pleasure of introducing them, you have coaches over the years that don't necessarily enjoy the engagement of the process with our fans, but I can tell you that our coaches recognize the value that you all bring to the program. And, we look at it as a partnership. We look at it as a team, and we don't take for granted a single season ticket, whether that's in the first row or the last row of the arena. And we don't take for granted, a single gift that rolls in here to support our programs. I think what I'll just leave you with as we head up to 1 o'clock is that, from everything from our board of trustees to myself to President Spina, we're going to be in for a ride for the next however long, right? Whether that is 6 months, however this shapes up, whether that's how our basketball teams compete, play, the arena, fans, tickets, etc. And I would just ask all of you, and we'll do this both ways aside the relationship. We're just going to lock arms together. We think that, and we're hopeful that this can be a 1-year snapshot in time that we can come out on the other side together on, and our basketball programs are not going to take a step backwards. We're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to deal with the adversity that we have. We're going to press on. We need your help to press on. We need to be together, and we're going to do that for you. And if you guys do that for us, I think we're going to take the long-term prism in all of this. And there are going to be some challenges along the way, whether there's a game maybe you didn't get to come to because of attendance restrictions, or you know, there's a game that gets moved or there's some other situation, we're going to look at it. We're going to face it, and we're going to push through. So I thank all of you for being on here. We're grateful for your support. And if there's anything we can do for you, your businesses, your organizations, please reach out, and we'll go from there. And Coach Green and Grant, thanks for joining us. You know, I'll let you say your final goodbyes or farewell to the group, and then I'll end.
Great.
Yeah, just thank all you. I mean, again, we had 200 and some people on this, and for all your support. Some of you may be big basketball fans, and some of you may have never been to a game, and that doesn't matter. We're all in this together. You know, we're all Flyers, and I just appreciate however you support this university. We're very, very grateful, and I know I say it all the time, but we're so blessed here to have really the best support and the best fans in the country. And so I just want to thank you all, and everyone stay safe and take care.
Coach?
And I'll echo what Shauna said. Our guys, we talk about this as a staff and with our team. We're really, really fortunate to have all of you guys as partners with what we do. This is our program. This is not my program or just you know, the athletic department or even the University of Dayton. We feel like we're a part of the community. And so everything that you guys do for us, the support you give us with your resources, with your voices, with your time, it means a great deal. And we want our players to understand that it's bigger than them as individuals. We're part of the community, and we get to impact the community by doing what we love to do. And you know, so hopefully, as we all navigate whatever's coming, as we navigate the pandemic in this upcoming year, as Neil said, let's lock arms together and understand that you know, we're all in this together. So we appreciate all the support that you guys give us, and hopefully we look forward to seeing you guys here real soon.
So, all right, thanks everybody, and hope you stay safe. And if we can do anything for you, let us know. And, have a great day.
All right, go Flyers.
Thank you.